A drifter with nothing but $3, 6 bullets, and a heart full of guilt. A widow fighting alone against the most powerful man in the territory. And a barefoot little girl standing in a freezing creek, the only one brave enough to ask a stranger to stop running. What happens when broken people find each other at exactly the right moment? Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't drawing your gun, it's choosing to stay. Welcome to Cowboy Ember, where the West comes alive through stories of love, courage, and the quiet heroism of ordinary hearts. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community. If this story moved something in you, drop a heart below, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and ride along with us. Subscribe so you never miss the next Ember.
It was August of 1885, out in the Wyoming Territory. Elijah Cross stood right in the heart of Sweetwater Creek. The water was up to his knees and cold enough to make a man's bones ache. The current tugged hard at his boots, trying to push him over, but he had faced down worse things. He had been colder on the inside than any creek could ever be. In his saddlebag, he had $3.17. His whole life's worth was tucked inside that leather pouch. The horse he was sitting on was getting on in years, its ribs showing through a dusty coat. But that old horse was loyal, and loyalty meant something. The Colt revolver on his hip held 6 rounds. They were the last bullets he would be buying for a good long while. He was 35 years old, and this was all he had to show for it. A man standing alone in a creek with nothing but pocket change and a pistol he prayed he'd never have to fire again. 8 long years. It had been 8 years since Nathan drew his last breath in his arms, on the floor of a bank in Silver Creek, Colorado. 8 years since his little brother looked at him, blood on his lips, and whispered, "Eli, I'm sorry," as if it were his fault. As if Nathan did something wrong by believing his big brother would keep him safe. 30 seconds. That was all the time it took. Eli got there 30 seconds after the gunfire started. The tiny sliver of time between a brother living and a brother in the ground. He handed in his marshal's badge that very night. He just walked away from it all and spent the next 8 years drifting between ranches and towns. He never settled long enough for anyone to learn his name. And he never stayed long enough to make a promise he might not be able to keep. The sun was beating down something fierce. It was the kind of July heat that glues a man's shirt to his back and makes his mind wander to dark places. Eli ran a thumb over the scar on his left wrist, a perfect horseshoe shape. He got it the day Nathan died, when he grabbed the bank's door handle so hard the hot metal branded his skin. That scar never did fade. He reckoned it never would. He was just another drifter searching for a day's work. That is what he told himself each and every morning, just passing through. Just another ranch hand. Just another ghost that nobody would ever remember. That is when he heard the voice. "Mister, please. My mama is dying and they are fixing to take me away." Eli's horse spooked. He pulled on the reins to steady the animal and looked up. A little girl was standing in the creek about 20 feet away. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, maybe even younger. She was barefoot. The bottom of her dress was all torn, and her dark, tangled hair fell right past her skinny shoulders. The water was up to her shins, and she had her arms wrapped tight around herself, shaking. But it was not from the cold. It was from something much worse than being cold. A dog was standing on the bank right behind her. It was a cattle dog, brown and white, with its tail tucked between its legs. The dog was barking, but it was a desperate sound, the kind of bark that says the whole world is coming apart at the seams. You could see the little girl's hands were shaking. Even from where he was, Eli could see her fingers trembling. How she just could not keep them still. She looked up at him with eyes that were way too big for her small face, brown and pleading, and filled with a sorrow no child ought to carry. "Please, mister," she said one more time, her voice all crackly. Please, you just got to listen. It before he passed on. My condolences about your father. He passed 2 years ago now. Emma's voice was as level as she could make it, but her little chin quivered. He took ill from the water. Mama is certain the mine fouled it, but not a soul believes her. And now Judge Wade is saying she is not fit to raise me. Says a single woman cannot properly raise a little girl. He is coming this Monday with the official court papers. Eli's jaw went tight. Monday. That was just 3 days away. Little girl, I am just a man passing through, he said. I cannot do anything about judges and legal documents. You have got 2 good hands, do you not? Emma's voice suddenly had a fire in it. A small fire, but hot all the same. Mama needs help with the mending. Our fence is falling down, the barn roof has a leak, and the pasture is just overrun with weeds. Judge Wade told everyone in town she is not managing, and now they all believe him because the whole place looks like no one gives a darn. She waded a step closer to him. The dog let out a whine from the creek bank. But Mama does care, Emma said. She works so hard her hands bleed. She just cannot do it all by herself. And Monday is coming and they are going to take me from her unless someone steps up to help. Eli just looked at this little child, standing barefoot in the cold creek, shaking and fighting for her mother with nothing but words and pure, stubborn grit. A man could ride on by most things. He could turn a deaf ear to most folks asking for help. He could tell himself it was none of his business and truly believe it. But a child standing in the middle of a creek, begging for her mama, well, that just stops a man in his tracks, whether he wants it to or not. Where is this ranch of yours? Eli asked. The relief that washed over Emma's face was so pure, so complete, that it broke something loose inside of Eli's chest. A part of him he had kept locked up tight for 8 long years. Just up the hill, she said. It will take 10 minutes. I can show you the way. I am not promising you a thing, Eli said. I will take a look, and that is all. That will be enough. Emma finally stepped out of the water. She splashed over to the bank, picked up her dog, and started up a thin trail without a single look back. She was certain, absolutely positive, that Eli would come along. Eli sat there on his horse in the middle of Sweetwater Creek. The water just swirled around his horse's legs. The sun beat down hard on his shoulders. He had $3.17 in his pocket, 6 rounds in his pistol, and a promise he had already broken once in his life. He followed the little girl. The ranch was on a small slope that looked out over the valley, about a 1/4 mile up from the creek, and it was nestled against a line of cottonwood trees that offered some relief from the blistering summer heat. Eli could see the trouble long before he got to the gate. The fence posts were leaning over at angles that just did not seem possible. A few were snapped right in two, just lying there in the dust. The wire was hanging so low a small child could just step right over it. The barn door was hanging on by a single hinge, just swaying back and forth in the breeze. Weeds were choking out what looked like it was supposed to be a vegetable patch. 2 horses were standing in a pasture that was in bad need of being cleared. Their coats were dull, and you could see their ribs. But the little cabin, it told a different tale. The windows were spotless. There were curtains hanging on the inside. They were faded, but they were tidy. Flowers were growing out of a tin can that sat on the porch rail. Somebody had swept that porch this very morning. They swept it clean, even though everything else was falling to pieces all around them. Somebody was putting up a real hard fight to keep this place going. The front door creaked open before Emma even made it to the steps. A woman came out onto the porch. She was maybe 32 or 33 years old. Her reddish-brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, with little strands escaping to frame a face that was tanned from the sun and etched with worry. She had on a faded blue dress that was patched up at the elbows, and an apron that was stained from hard work. Her hands were rough and scarred. They were the hands of a person who had been doing a man's work for way too long without any help. She was not holding a gun. She was not holding anything at all. She just stood right there on the porch looking at her daughter and the stranger that her daughter had brought home with her. Her eyes looked tired, with deep, dark circles under them. The kind of eyes you see on someone who has not had a good night's sleep in months or maybe even years. Emma, Catherine Brennan. The woman's voice was firm, but you could hear the strain in it. "What have you done, Mama? He can help us. I told you not to go around begging from strangers. I was not begging, I was asking. Papa always said there was a difference." The woman's gaze shifted to Eli. They were brown eyes, just like Emma's, but they were full of something that made Eli's chest feel tight. It was a mix of calculation, weariness, and an exhaustion so bone-deep it had become a part of her. And way down underneath all that, buried but still glowing, was the stubborn flame of someone who had been fighting all alone for too long to trust anyone easily. Eli tipped the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, your daughter stopped me down at the creek. She says you could use a hand around this place." The woman's jaw set like stone. "My girl has too much to say." "Mama." "Be quiet, Emma." She kept her eyes locked on Eli. "I appreciate the offer, mister, but I do not know you from Adam, and I do not accept charity." "This is not charity," Eli said. "I am just heading north, looking for work to get me through the summer. I can fix that fence for you, rehang your barn door, clear out that pasture. It is a few days of work, then I will be on my way." "A few days?" The woman's voice was flat, with no emotion in it. "Judge Wade is coming on Monday. That is 3 days from now. You really think 3 days of mending a fence is going to persuade a court that I am fit to keep my own daughter?" Eli met her gaze and held it steady. "I think 3 days of a tidy ranch might just help your case. I think a fence that is standing upright and a barn door that works might show that you have got some help. It might show that you are not all alone out here. But I am all alone." The words slipped out, quiet and broken. "I have been alone for 2 years, and 3 days of playing pretend is not going to change Judge Wade's mind." Emma grabbed onto her mother's hand. "Mama, please." The woman looked down at her daughter. Something unspoken passed between the two of them. Something Eli could not quite understand, but he could surely feel. It was a mother's fear and a child's hope. It was the heavy weight of 2 years fighting a fight that nobody could win by themselves. The dog, the one Emma called Dusty, trotted over to the woman's side and sat down as if he was waiting for her decision, too. The woman let out a long, slow breath. "3 days," she said at last. "You can sleep in the barn. You will eat what we eat. And I am telling you now, it is not much. And if I find you drinking or stealing, or you say one single wrong word to my daughter, I will get myself a gun, and I promise you I will use it. Is that clear?" "Clear as a bell, ma'am. My name is Kate. It is Mrs. Brennan, if you want to be formal. I do not need to be called ma'am. It makes me feel like my mother-in-law." Eli almost let a smile show. "Almost." Emma pumped her little fist in the air. "I told you, Mama. I told you God would send someone to help us." "God did not send him, Emma." Kate's voice was just plain tired. "You went and cornered him in a creek. There is a big difference." But as she turned around to go back, inside, Eli saw her eyes soften just a little bit. It was a relief she would never say out loud, a gratitude she would never admit to, and a hope she did not dare to believe in. Eli tied his horse to a fence post, the one that was still standing, and he began to size up the work that needed to be done. By that afternoon, Eli had taken off his outer shirt and had already replaced 4 of the fence posts. The sun was beating down without any mercy. Sweat was dripping into his eyes. His hands fell back into the old rhythm of honest work, and his mind grew quiet, the way it only ever did when his body was pushed to its limits. Emma came out holding a jar of water. "Mama said you might be getting thirsty." She was right about that. "Thank you kindly." Emma sat down in the dirt, crossing her legs. Dusty curled up right beside her. She watched Eli work with a steady gaze. The kind of look that kids get when they are studying something they think is real important. "Did you ever have a kid of your own?" Emma asked. Eli's hands froze on the fence post. "No. Did you ever want one?" "I had a little brother once." Eli slammed the post into the ground with a lot more force than he needed to. "I raised him myself after our parents died." "What happened to him?" The post sank deeper into the earth. Eli's knuckles were white as he gripped the post-hole digger. "He is gone now." Emma was silent for a spell, the kind of quiet that meant she knew what gone meant. She had her own experience with that word. "My papa is gone too," she finally said. Mama says that being gone is not the same thing as being forgotten. Your mama is a smart woman. She is the smartest person in this whole territory. Emma's voice swelled with a fierce kind of pride. She knew the water had gone bad before anyone else did. She told the doctor, she told the sheriff, and she told the judge. Her voice got hard when she said that last word, but nobody paid her any mind. Papa passed away anyway. Eli stopped his work, put down the post-hole digger, and looked at this 9-year-old girl sitting there in the dirt, her hands still shaking a little bit, talking about her father's death like she had been forced to tell that same story 100 times, and not once did anyone ever believe her. "How did your papa die, Emma?" "He got sick." Her voice was flat and clinical, the way children sound when life has forced them to grow up way too fast. "He was real sick for months. His hands would shake. His stomach was always hurting him. Doc Pierce said it was just a fever." But Mama, she did not believe him. "What did your mama think it was?" "The mine." Emma's eyes turned hard as flint. "The Wade Mining Company started digging upstream from us. Right after that, the water started to change. It tasted strange, and it smelled funny. Papa drank from our well every single day. He worked hard, so he drank a lot of water. 6 months after that, he could not even hold a hammer. A year after that, he was gone." Emma poked at the dirt with her finger. Her hand was shaking even more now. "Eli saw it." "And nobody bothered to look into it?" he asked in a low voice. "Judge Wade said Mama was just being hysterical." Emma spit the word out like it was something rotten. "That is what he called her. Hysterical. She is not hysterical. She is right." Eli glanced toward the cabin. Through the window, he could see Kate moving around inside, getting their supper ready. Her movements were smooth and practiced. They were the motions of a woman who had no time to spare and no one to spare it with. "What does Judge Wade want with your ranch?" Eli asked. Emma's eyes got dark. "He wants Mama to sell it. The mining company wants to get their hands on our land. Papa always told them no, and Mama keeps telling them no, so Judge Wade says she is not fit to keep me. He says a woman all by herself is not a proper mother." A knot tightened up in Eli's gut. He had seen this kind of thing before, years and years ago, back when he used to wear a badge. Powerful men using the law like a club, twisting justice all around to serve their own greed. "When is he coming?" Eli asked. "Monday morning. He came right up on our porch last week with Deputy Carter. He had papers with him, legal papers." Emma's chin started to tremble. "Mama just stood right there and told him to get off her property. He said he would be back on Monday to take me away. He said it was for my own good." The supper bell rang out. Kate was standing on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Emma," Mr. Cross, "go on and get cleaned up." Emma shot up from her spot. About halfway to the cabin, she stopped and looked back. "Mr. Eli." "Yes. You are not going to leave before Monday, are you? You said 3 days. That is after Monday." "I said 3 days, and I meant it." Emma's smile was so bright it seemed to chip away at something hard deep inside Eli's chest. Something he had kept locked up tight since Nathan died. A feeling that hurt to let out again. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she took off for the cabin with Dusty right at her heels. Eli stood by himself in the yard, his hands gripping the fence post, the reins wrapped tight around them. 3 days. 3 days to mend a fence and maybe make a real difference. 3 days until a judge was set to come and tear a family apart. He had let Nathan down when it counted the most. Perhaps he could save this family in 3 days. Perhaps. Supper was plain fare, salt pork, beans, and cornbread. Kate put it on the table without any fuss. Emma said grace, a simple child's prayer, spoken with a quick sincerity, and they ate without a word for a few minutes. "This is good, ma'am." "Kate," Eli corrected himself. "It is food. It keeps us on our feet." Kate did not even look up from her plate. "It is what we have." "Mama's cornbread took first prize at the county fair," Emma announced, back before people quit talking to us. The table fell silent. Kate's fork stopped moving. She set it down real slow and careful. "Emma, it is true, Mama." Mrs. Crawford said your cornbread was the best she had ever put in her mouth. Then after Papa died and you started asking questions, Mrs. Crawford would not even give us the time of day in town. Kate's jaw clenched. A little muscle jumped near her ear. Emma, eat your beans. But Mr. Eli ought to know. If he is staying for 3 days, he should know why folks look at us sideways. Kate lifted her eyes to meet Eli's. In them, he saw a woman making a decision, figuring out whether to trust, whether to crack open the door just an inch wider to this stranger who was sitting at her husband's table. My husband died from mercury poisoning. Her voice was as flat as a tabletop, completely under control. The voice of a woman who had told her story too many times to men in charge who did not give a damn. The Wade Mining Company, their operation upstream, it poisoned our well water. Thomas drank from that well every single day, worked this ranch until he dropped, and he always stayed hydrated, just like a good man is supposed to. 6 months later, he could not even hold on to his tools. A year after that, he was in the ground. "And you can prove this?" Eli asked softly. "I know it." Kate's hand squeezed her fork. "Proving it is another story." Doc Pierce wrote down "fever of unknown origin" on the death certificate. The mining company has Judge Wade right in their pocket. Wade is on the town council. He has the sheriff on a string. He runs the land office. He runs the whole show. Why does he want your land in particular? Kate's eyes got sharp. Because Thomas's ranch is sitting right on top of the richest vein they have not dug into yet. They need this piece of land to expand their mine. Thomas would not sell when he was alive. I am not selling now that he is gone. So Wade came up with another plan. Taking your daughter. If I am declared an unfit mother, the court will appoint a guardian. Wade will make damn sure that guardian is someone he has control over. Someone who will sell off the land to pay for debts. Her voice cracked just a little. Debts that are not even real. Kate's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat on the table as if she could force them to be still. They killed my husband, she said in a low voice. Now they want to take my daughter and my home. And this entire town just stands by and watches, because Victor Wade signs their paychecks and buys their silence. Emma reached over the table and laid her small hand on top of her mother's. Kate looked at that hand, at those little fingers that were trembling just like hers, just like Thomas's had in his last months. We are not letting them, Mama, Emma said. Kate covered Emma's hand with both of her own and held on for dear life. No, baby girl, we are not. Eli put his fork down. Who else got sick? From the water? Kate just looked at him. What? If the mine poisoned your well, it had to have poisoned others downstream. Who else got sick? Kate was quiet for a long spell, her eyes looking somewhere far away, thinking back over 2 years of being shut out and ignored. The Henderson boy, he had the shakes for about a year, she said slowly. Old man Patterson's cattle started dropping. Martha Webb's little girl, she has been frail since the day she was born, but nobody ever put it together with the mine. You put it together. Nobody wanted to listen. Kate's voice turned hard as rock. Wade spread the word that Thomas died of typhoid. That is a whole lot easier for people to swallow than the truth. The truth means the mine gets shut down. The truth means Wade loses a pile of money. The truth means this town loses its jobs. Nobody wants the truth, Mr. Cross. Eli, she paused, studying his face. Why? You will be gone in 3 days. Maybe, but I am here right now. Kate stared at him from across the table. The lantern sitting between them threw shadows on her face, making her eyes seem darker, more shielded. She was trying to read him, trying to puzzle out what kind of man shows up at a stranger's table and offers to take on their troubles. What do you want from us? She asked. The question just hung there in the quiet room. Eli knew what she was really asking. What his price would be. What kind of payment he would expect. Because in Kate's world, nobody ever helped for nothing. Nobody ever stood up for a widow and her girl without wanting something back. Nothing, Eli said. I do not want a thing from you. Then why help? Eli's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Because 8 years ago somebody needed help, and I was about 30 seconds too late, he said, his voice low. I have been running from that moment ever since. Your daughter stood in a creek today and asked me to stop running, so I stopped. Kate's face did not change, but he saw something move behind her eyes. It was not trust. Not just yet. But it was the chance of trust. The very first crack in a wall that had been built up high and strong from 2 years of fighting all by herself. Monday is in 3 days, she said. I know Wade has the law. He has the money. He has this whole town scared into looking the other way. I know that too. 3 days of fixing a fence is not going to stop him. Eli leaned in just a bit. Then we had better find something that will. Kate held his gaze for a long moment. Then she stood up and began to clear the plates. Emma helped, moving about the small kitchen like she had done it 1,000 times. They worked side by side in silence, a mother and her daughter, a team that had learned how to get by with 2 people doing the work of 3. Eli brought his plate over to the wash basin. Kate took it from him without a glance. There is a lantern out in the barn, she said. Blankets are in the tack room. It is not much. It is enough. Breakfast is at dawn. We get an early start. Yes, ma'am. Her lips twitched, almost making a smile. I told you not to call me ma'am. Yes, Kate. This time she really did smile. Just a little, just for a second. And then it was gone, swallowed up by the exhaustion that was carved into every line on her face. Eli walked out to the barn as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The sky blazed with purple and gold, so beautiful it was almost painful to see. He had not taken the time to notice a sunset in 8 years. He had not taken the time to notice much of anything except for the bottom of a whiskey bottle and the dusty road leading out of whatever town he was escaping. The barn was just like Kate had said, simple. A stall for his horse, bales of hay piled in the corner, and a tack room with saddles that had seen better days. He found the blankets right where she said, and he laid them out over some clean hay in an empty stall. His horse was already settled in, chewing on hay, perfectly content. Eli sat down on a hay bale and pulled his boots off. His body ached, but it was a good kind of ache, the kind that comes from an honest day's work. He had not felt that in a long, long time. Through a crack in the barn wall, he could see the cabin. A single window was glowing with lamplight. He could see Kate's shadow move behind the curtain. He watched as she sat down at the table, all by herself now that Emma was asleep. He watched as she rested her head in her hands. She stayed that way for a good while. Eli turned his head, giving her the privacy she deserved. But the picture of her stayed in his mind. A woman sitting alone at a table in the lamplight, carrying a burden that no one should ever have to carry alone. He laid back on the hay and stared up at the barn roof. He could see the stars through the gaps in the wooden planks. He thought he should patch that roof tomorrow, just add it to the list. Fence, barn door, roof, pasture. 3 days of work, 3 days to make some kind of difference. His mind drifted back to Nathan, to that bank in Silver Creek, to showing up 30 seconds too late to change a single thing. Nathan had been so young, 22 years old, chomping at the bit to prove he had what it took, wanting to be a lawman just like his big brother. Eli had gotten him the deputy job, trained him, taught him how to shoot, how to size people up, how to stay safe. He had taught him everything, except how to survive when your own brother gets there 30 seconds too late. The lamp in the cabin window went dark. Eli closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but it would not come. Around midnight, he finally gave up on sleep. Eli sat up and decided he ought to check the barn just to be sure he had not missed anything in the dark. Kate had been good enough to offer him shelter. The least he could do was make certain her place was secure. He lit the old lantern and walked through the barn. It was in much better shape than the outside let on. Somebody had taken good care of it, kept it swept clean, stored the feed just right, and kept the tack clean, even if it was old. Thomas Brennan must have been a good man. Eli could tell just by looking at his barn. A man's barn tells you a whole lot about his character. In the tack room, Eli noticed a shelf with some supplies. There were nails, some wire, a few tools, and tucked right behind a box of horseshoes, he saw something that did not belong there. It was a leather journal. Eli pulled it out and ran his hand across the cover. It was good leather, well made, the kind of thing a man would use for his most important records. He knew he should not read it. It was not any of his business, but something deep inside made him open the cover anyway. The first page had a name written in a careful hand, Thomas Brennan, and below it, a date, January 1883. Eli started flipping through the pages. They were filled with daily entries, notes on the weather, details about the horses and plans for the crops, all the ordinary details of running a small ranch. But then the entries started to change. March 15th, 1883. The water from our well has a strange taste, like metal. Kate has noticed it too, April 2nd, 1883. My hands were shaking this morning. I could not hold my coffee cup steady. I told myself it was just the cold, but it is not cold. April 30th, 1883. Wade Mining started a new dig upstream. I saw them blasting yesterday. The creek ran gray for a whole hour. May 10th, 1883. The pains in my stomach are getting worse. Doc Pierce says it is nothing to worry about. He gave me laudanum. It does not help. June 1st, 1883. I cannot work a full day anymore. My hands shake too much. Kate is worried. Emma asked why her papa cannot carve wood for her anymore. I just told her I am just tired. The entries continued like that, month after month. Thomas Brennan was documenting his own slow death, connecting the pieces that nobody else would, building a case right there in his journal that he would never live long enough to present. Eli's throat felt tight. He kept on reading. November 4th, 1883. I talked to old man Patterson. His cattle are dying. They have the same symptoms I have got. I talked to Henderson. His boy's hands shake. All of us live downstream from that mine. December 12th, 1883. Wade came to the house today. He offered to buy our ranch. It was a good price. I told him no. He did not like that one bit. He said I was being stubborn. He said a sick man cannot run a ranch. I told him to get off my land. January 3rd, 1884. Doc Pierce came by. He examined me and I saw something in his eyes. It was fear. He knows. He knows what is happening and he will not say a word. Eli flipped through the pages faster now. The handwriting was getting shakier, much harder to read. Thomas's hands were failing him even as he tried to write. March 20th, 1884. I have collected water samples, 3 jars. 1 from the well water, 1 from the creek upstream, and 1 from the creek downstream. I sealed them all with wax. Kate does not know. If something happens to me, she is going to need proof. Eli stopped right there. He read that entry again. Water samples. Thomas had gathered his own evidence, had hidden it somewhere, and Kate had no idea. The very next entry was dated April 12th, 1884. April 12th, 1884. I hid the samples where Emma knows. It is our secret fishing spot. It is the only place Wade cannot find them. I told Emma about the big willow tree and the big rock, she will remember. She is smart, just like her mother. Eli's own hands were shaking now. He flipped to the very last entry. April 30th, 1884. I cannot write much anymore. My hands are too bad. Tell Kate I am sorry. Tell Emma I love her. Tell them both that I tried to fight. The water samples are the truth. The truth matters, even if I am gone. The writing ended right there. Eli checked the front of the journal. Thomas had died in May of 1884. He had written that last entry just days before he died. He had spent his final ounce of strength documenting the truth, making sure that someone someday would know what happened. Eli just sat there in the tack room holding a dead man's journal. It was evidence of a murder written in a failing hand. It was proof that Kate had been right all along. It was proof that Thomas Brennan had been poisoned by Wade's mine, that he had known it, had documented it, and had hidden samples right before he died. Samples that Emma knew how to find. Eli's mind was racing. Monday was only 3 days away. Wade was coming with legal papers to take Emma away. But if they could find those samples, if they could get them tested, if they could prove that Thomas was right, he stood up, held the journal tight against his chest, and looked toward the little cabin where Kate slept. She was exhausted, probably not sleeping well, probably just lying awake and worrying about Monday. He had to tell her. He had to show her this journal. He had to give her the one thing she had been searching for all this time: hope. Eli blew out the lantern, crossed the yard to the cabin, and knocked quietly on the door. A minute passed, and then another. He knocked again, a little softer this time. The door creaked open. Kate stood there in her nightdress, her hair down around her shoulders, her eyes heavy with a sleep that had not come easy. "What is wrong?" Her voice was sharp, wide awake. "Is Emma okay?" "Porch." She closed the door gently so they porch. She closed the door gently so they would not wake Emma. "What is it?" Eli held out the journal. "It is Thomas's journal." He wrote down daily entries, everything he noticed about the water, about getting sick, about the mine. Kate took the journal from him like it was made of glass. She opened it with trembling hands, saw her husband's handwriting, and made a sound that was not quite a sob. "I never saw this," she whispered. "I looked everywhere for it after he died. I thought maybe he had written something down, but I could not find anything. He hid it in the barn, in the tack room." Eli paused. "Kate, there's an entry from April. He collected water samples, 3 of them. Well, water, creek upstream, and creek downstream." Kate's head snapped up. "What?" "He sealed them and hid them. He says Emma knows where." Kate's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the journal to her chest. "Water samples, physical proof. If we can find them, if we can get them tested, we would have evidence." Eli finished her thought. "Real evidence. Not just your word against Wade's. Scientific proof that the mine poisoned your water." Kate was crying. Now just silent tears running down her face. She did not wipe them away. She just stood there on the porch in the moonlight, holding her dead husband's journal, crying for what was probably the first time in months. "Thomas," she whispered, "you brilliant, stubborn man." Eli gave her a moment, looked away to give her the privacy to cry for her husband, for the man who had loved her so much that he spent his dying days collecting the proof she would need after he was gone. Finally, Kate wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and looked at Eli with something he had not seen in her before. "Fire. Emma's secret fishing spot," she said. "Willow Creek, the big rock. I know exactly where that is. Thomas took her there every Saturday." "We will go tomorrow," Eli said. "Early, before anyone in town is even awake." Kate nodded. Then she looked down at the journal, at her husband's handwriting. "Why did you bring this to me tonight?" she asked. "You could have waited until morning." "Because you have been sitting in that cabin for 2 years thinking you are crazy," Eli said quietly. "Thinking that nobody believes you, thinking that maybe you are wrong about everything. You needed to know tonight that you are not crazy. You are not wrong. Thomas knew it. He wrote it all down. He left you proof." Kate's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard, holding herself together by sheer force of will. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me. Thank Thomas." Kate looked at the journal again, running her fingers over her husband's name on the cover. "I miss him," she said. It was so quiet, Eli almost did not hear it. "Every single day I miss him. And every day I have to be strong enough for both of us, for Emma, for this fight. And I am so tired of being strong all by myself." Eli did not know what to say to that. He did not have words for that kind of deep exhaustion, that kind of loneliness. So he just stood there with her in the moonlight. 2 people who had lost far too much, standing on a porch in the middle of nowhere, holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they were not as alone as they thought. "Get some sleep," Eli said finally. "Tomorrow we find those samples. Then we figure out how to use them." Kate nodded, turned to go back inside, but stopped at the door. "Eli," she said. Yeah? 3 days might not be enough time. Then I will stay longer." She looked at him. She really looked at him, trying to figure out why a drifter would make a promise like that. Why a stranger would choose to fight someone else's battle. "Why?" she asked. It was the same question from dinner. But it sounded different now, quieter, more real. Eli touched the scar on his wrist. "Because 8 years ago, I did not stay, and someone died because I left too soon. I will not make that same mistake again." Kate nodded slowly, went inside, and closed the door. Eli stood on the porch all by himself and looked up at the stars. They were so bright out here, away from the cities, away from everything. There was just stars and silence and the weight of promises made to people who desperately needed them. Monday was still just 3 days away. Judge Wade was coming. But tomorrow they would find Thomas Brennan's water samples. And maybe, just maybe, the truth would be enough. Eli walked back to the barn and lay down on the hay. His hand found the scar on his wrist. He traced it there in the dark. It was too late for Nathan. But maybe this time, 3 days would be exactly enough time for Emma and Kate. Maybe. Dawn came cold and clear. Eli was already awake when the first light touched the mountains. He had slept maybe 3 hours, kept waking up to the sound of nothing. The silence out here was different than the silence in towns. It was deeper, more honest. He walked to the creek and splashed cold water on his face. The shock of it woke his system right up. His reflection stared back at him from the water's surface. It was the same face he had seen for 8 years. It was the same scar there on his wrist, the same eyes that had seen his own brother pass on. But this morning something was different. He had a purpose, that was it. For the first time in 8 long years, Eli had a reason to get up that truly mattered. Kate was already in the kitchen when he walked into the cabin. She had coffee going, pitch black and strong enough to stand a spoon in. She handed him a mug without saying a word. She had dark circles under her eyes, but they were sharper than the day before, focused. "Emma is still asleep," Kate said softly. "I figured we ought to talk first." "I agree." They took seats at the table, with the journal lying right between them. Kate had clearly been reading it. He could see how the pages were marked, and how it was open to one particular page. "He knew his time was short," Kate said. Her voice was solid, but her hands trembled just a bit around her coffee mug. "Read what he wrote back in April. The man knew. And instead of getting his rest, instead of spending his last moments with us, he used his final days gathering proof. He was fighting for you and for Emma. He was fighting for every soul downstream from here." Kate looked right at him. That was just like Thomas. Always looking at the whole picture, always worried about the other families, the folks who would come after. Her voice started to break. "I just wished he'd let us be his world for a little while. To just rest. To let me be the one to take care of him." Eli didn't offer any words. "Sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all." Kate quickly wiped at her eyes, mad at herself for the tears. "We have to get those samples before Wade figures out we have this journal, before he realizes Thomas wrote everything down. Does he know about it? I don't believe so. Thomas was careful about where he kept it. But that man is not stupid. He's got to be wondering what Thomas might have left behind." Emma showed up in the doorway then, her hair a sleepy mess. She was still in her nightgown with that old dog Dusty trailing right behind her like a shadow. "Mama, why are you up so early?" Kate's entire face changed. The sadness vanished and a smile that seemed almost genuine took its place. "Good morning, sweetheart. Come on over here." Emma crawled up into her mother's lap. A little too big for that now, being 9 years old and all. But Kate held on to her anyway. Held her tight like she was scared someone might try to snatch her away. "Emma," Kate said in a gentle voice, "Mr. Eli found something of your papa's, his journal. Do you remember Papa writing in a journal?" Emma just nodded against her mother's shoulder. He wrote in it every night at the table after I was in bed. He wrote about a place, your secret fishing spot where you and Papa used to go. Emma pulled back and looked at her mother with those wide brown eyes. Down by Willow Creek, at the big rock where Papa carved our names. That's the one? Kate brushed a piece of hair off Emma's forehead. Papa hid something there for us, something really important, and we need to go find it. What did he hide? Some glass jars filled with water. Do you think you could show us where it is? Emma's whole face brightened. I know the exact spot. Papa showed me. He told me it was our secret. Just ours. Eli put his coffee down. How far of a walk is it? About a 20-minute walk through the woods, Kate answered. There's a trail. Thomas and Emma would go in the early mornings, before anyone else was up. Then we should go now before the rest of the town is stirring, before anyone can see us. They got dressed in a hurry. Kate put on her riding clothes, her boots, and a hat with a wide brim. She moved with a new energy this morning, with a purpose in every step. Yesterday she looked worn out, beaten. Today she was a woman on a mission. Emma was practically bouncing with excitement. Can Dusty come? Dusty comes, Eli said. It's always good to have a dog along. They went out the back of the property onto a skinny trail that twisted through cottonwood trees and thick brush. It was a cool morning. Birds were singing, the kind of peaceful morning that feels like the quiet before a storm. Emma took the lead with Dusty running on ahead, then circling back, then running ahead all over again. That dog knew this path by heart. He had walked it more times than you could count with Emma and Thomas. Kate walked quiet right next to Eli. Her hand kept going to her pocket where she had put the journal, just to feel it was still there, to make sure it wasn't all a dream. Thomas brought her here every Saturday morning, Kate said, her voice low. 5 in the morning. They would fish for trout and be back by 7 with breakfast. Emma would tell me all the stories about what Papa had taught her. How to read the currents in the water. How to have patience. Her voice got softer. She cherished those mornings with him. She still does. I can hear it in her voice whenever she talks about him. Kate took a quick look over at Eli. You're good with her. Good with kids. I raised my little brother since he was about 10. I suppose I picked up a thing or two. What happened to him, your brother? Eli's jaw went tight. The scar on his wrist seemed to ache. He's gone because I wasn't there for him when it counted. That's the only thing that matters. Kate didn't ask anymore. She just walked alongside him in that comfortable silence, giving him the same kind of space he had given her the night before. The path soon opened up into a clearing. Willow Creek ran right through it, clear and swift. A huge granite boulder sat right where the creek made a hard turn. An old willow tree grew right beside it, its roots all thick and twisted, reaching down into the water. Emma ran straight for the tree, and Dusty started barking, his tail wagging like crazy. Here, Emma pointed up at the trunk. See? Papa carved our names. Eli stepped in for a closer look. There, etched into the bark, were the letters T.B. and E.B. Thomas Brennan and Emma Brennan. The carvings were old, but they were deep, made with care, made to stick around. Papa said this was our place forever, Emma said. Nobody else's, just ours. Kate knelt down beside the big rock. Her hands started moving over the granite, searching for something. Thomas wrote that he hid them where Emma would know. Where is it, honey? Where would Papa hide something special? Emma thought hard for a moment, her little face all serious, and then she broke into a big smile. The hidey hole down in the roots. She scrambled over to the bottom of the willow tree. The roots made a kind of natural hollow right where they met up with the boulder. Emma started digging with her bare hands. Dusty got in on it too, digging with his paws and sending dirt flying everywhere. Easy there, Emma, Kate warned. Don't break anything. Emma's fingertips then bumped against something solid. I found it, Mama. I found it. She pulled out a wooden box, a small one about the size of a loaf of bread, all wrapped up in oilcloth. The cloth was still good, still waterproof even after a year. Kate took the box with shaky hands, placed it on the boulder, and began to unwrap it. She peeled back the oilcloth, ever so slow and careful. Tucked inside were 3 glass jars, each one capped with dark wax and marked in Thomas's neat hand. Well water, Brennan Ranch, April 10th, 1884. Creek water upstream of Wade Mine, April 10th, 1884. Creek water downstream of Wade Mine, April 10th, 1884. Kate clutched the jars to her chest, a sound tearing from her throat that was half a laugh and half a sob. It was the feeling between heartbreak and victory, a feeling that had no name. He did it, she breathed out. That beautiful, stubborn man. He knew he was on his deathbed, and he still gathered up the proof. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Papa left us what we need, Mama. He knew. He always knew what to do. A lump formed in Eli's throat. He turned his gaze away, giving them their moment. His hand instinctively went to the scar on his palm. Nathan never got this kind of chance. He didn't leave behind any proof or any justice, just his blood on a bank floor and a brother who got there a few moments too late. But Thomas Brennan, he fought back. Even as he was dying, poisoned, with his hands shaking. He fought. He gathered his evidence, hid it away, and made sure his family had the weapon they needed after he was gone. That was a kind of bravery Eli had never witnessed before. "We need to get moving," Eli said in a low voice. "Get these jars somewhere safe." Kate nodded, wiping her cheeks as she got to her feet. Not the ranch. Wade could show up with a search warrant. He would tear the whole place down to the dirt. Who do you trust? I mean, really, truly trust? Kate took a moment to think. Henry Webb. He owns the blacksmith shop in town. He was Thomas's best friend, and he is the only one who still speaks to me. Can he keep a secret? He kept Thomas's secrets for 20 years. He will keep this one. Eli stared at the 3 jars. We will split them up. We will leave one with Webb, I will take one, and we will bury one right back here. That way, if Wade ever finds one, there are still 2 more out there. Kate just looked at him. You think like a lawman. I was one, a long time ago. Her eyes grew wide. You were a deputy marshal. For 3 years, in a different territory. He took one of the jars and slipped it inside his shirt. Right now, it just means I know how evidence works. And I know how snakes like Wade think. Why did you quit being a marshal? Her hand was still resting on the jar. Because somebody I was supposed to protect ended up dead, and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Kate fell silent. Then I reckon you are trying to fix it now. He did not answer her. He could not. Emma pulled on his sleeve. We need to go. Sometimes Deputy Carter rides his horse down this trail. They buried that 3rd jar deep in the hollow, covering it just right with dirt and scattered leaves until it looked like no one had ever been there. Emma stood back, looking pleased. Papa would be proud. We are keeping his secret. Yes, he would be, honey, Kate said. She took hold of Emma's hand. Let us go on home. They made their way back through the woods, moving quickly. Eli carried Kate's jar, which he had wrapped in a cloth. Emma and her dog Dusty ran on ahead, peeking into clearings and then waving them forward when the coast was clear. They finally broke through the trees right behind the barn. Kate stopped dead in her tracks. A horse was tied to the railing on the front porch, a big chestnut mare with a silver-trimmed saddle. That is Deputy Carter's horse, Emma whispered. Kate shoved the jar into Eli's hands. Hide it, right now. Eli ducked into the barn. He found an empty stall in the back, wrapped the jar in an old horse blanket, and buried it deep under a pile of loose hay, making sure it looked like nothing had been disturbed. By the time he came back around, Kate was already up on the porch. Deputy Carter was leaning against the railing with his thumbs hooked in his belt. Carter was in his mid-30s with a thick neck and a star pinned to his chest that looked too big for the man wearing it. He smiled when he saw Kate, but it was a cold, empty smile. It was the smile of a man who got a kick out of having power over folks who could not fight back. Mrs. Brennan, Carter said, his voice as smooth as snake oil. Just checking in on you. Judge Wade wanted me to make sure you and the little girl are holding up all right. We are fine, Deputy. Kate's voice was pure ice. I see you still have that drifter hanging around. Carter's eyes shifted over to Eli, who had come to stand near the barn. Folks in town are starting to gossip. Let them talk. Now, Mrs. Brennan, that is not a wise thing to say. Carter pushed himself off the railing. He took a step toward her. A woman in your situation. With things being how they are for you, appearances are important. Judge Wade is a fair man. He would hate to see anything that might make Monday more difficult than it has to be. Kate's back went ramrod straight. Monday, the day he plans on taking my daughter from me. The day he plans to ensure the girl's welfare. Carter's cold smile got wider. There is a difference. Get off my porch, Deputy. Carter held up his hands in a fake surrender. Just being neighborly, ma'am. Oh, and Mrs. Brennan. He tipped his hat with a showy kind of politeness. The judge mentioned he would be willing to settle this whole thing without going to court. If you would just reconsider his offer on the land, it would save everyone a whole lot of trouble. The land is not for sale. Everything is for sale, ma'am. It just depends on the price. Carter swung himself up onto his horse. His eyes scanned the property. He noticed the new fence posts Eli had put in yesterday, and the barn door that now hung straight. His gaze stopped on Eli. Your hired man does good work, Carter said. It is a shame he will not be around long, enough to finish the job. He rode off, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Kate stood frozen until the sound of the horse's hooves faded away completely. Then, her shoulders slumped. For just one single moment, her strong facade cracked, revealing the woman underneath who had been fighting all alone for way too long. Emma pressed up against her mother's side. He scared me, Mama. Kate knelt, getting down on eye level with her daughter. That is why he came, honey. To scare us. To remind us that Judge Wade is always watching and that we are not safe. But we have Papa's samples now. Does not that mean we win? Kate looked over at Eli, then back to Emma. It means we have a chance. That is all it is, just a chance. Emma's face fell. That is not enough. Sometimes a chance is all you get, Eli said. He walked over to the porch and sat down on the step. And you have to fight like hell to make it count. Emma sat down next to him. Dusty the dog laid down across both of their feet. Mr. Eli, are you scared? Yes. Papa used to say that people only make threats when they are the ones who are scared. Deputy Carter came here because Judge Wade is getting nervous. That means we are doing something right. Eli looked down at this 9-year-old girl. Her hands might have trembled and her body was slowly being poisoned, but her mind was sharp as a tack. She saw the patterns that most grown-ups missed, and she understood the game that was being played. Your papa was a smart man, Eli said. He was the smartest, Emma agreed. She leaned her head against Eli's arm. Do you think he can see us from heaven? Do you think he knows we found his samples? Eli's throat tightened up. He thought about his brother Nathan. He wondered if the dead could watch over the living. He wondered if his brother knew that Eli had spent 8 years running from the guilt of that day. Yeah, Eli said, his voice quiet. I think he knows. Kate watched them from the porch door, her daughter and this stranger who had just shown up 3 days ago. Emma had taken a liking to Eli right away, trusting him without a second thought. Children have a sixth sense about people. Kate had learned to trust those instincts, but trusting a drifter was a dangerous thing to do. Trusting anyone was dangerous when the whole town had turned its back on you. Still, Eli had found the journal, he had helped find the samples, and he had promised he would stay. Maybe, just maybe. He was different. We will go to Henry Webb's tonight, Kate said. After Emma is asleep, we cannot be seen going into town together in the daylight. Eli nodded. What about Emma? Who is going to stay with her? Kate's face tensed up. I hate leaving her alone, but we cannot take her with us. If something goes wrong, nothing is going to go wrong. We will ride in after dark, give Webb the sample, and ride straight back. It will take an hour, and if Carter is watching the roads, Then we will not take the roads. They waited until the moon was high in the sky. Emma had fallen asleep an hour before, worn out from the morning's excitement. Kate tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stayed there for a moment longer, the way mothers do when they are scared each night might be their last one together. Dusty stayed with Emma. The dog would not leave her side, and Kate was thankful for that. Eli saddled up Kate's mare and his own horse. They rode without lanterns, using only the moonlight and Kate's knowledge of every trail, every shortcut, and every shadow in the woods. The ride took 30 minutes. They came into town from the north, avoiding Main Street and sticking to the back alleys and empty lots. Henry Webb lived in a small house behind his blacksmith shop on the edge of town. The forge was cold at this time of night, but a little smoke was still rising from the chimney of the house. A light glowed in one of the windows. Kate swung down from her horse, tied the reins, and walked to the door. She knocked 3 times, fast. A minute went by, and then the door creaked open. Henry Webb stood in the doorway, holding a shotgun in one hand and a candle in the other. He was 70 years old. His arms were like iron from 50 years of working the forge. His hair and beard were white, and his eyes had seen enough liars to spot an honest person right away. Kate Brennan. His voice was rough with surprise. Lord Almighty, girl, what in the world are you doing here this late? Henry, I need your help. Webb looked past Kate to where Eli was standing with the horses. Who is he? His name is Eli. He is helping us. Can we please come inside before someone sees us? Webb stepped back quickly. Get in here before old Mrs. Patterson peeks out her window and starts spreading gossip. The house inside was simple and clean. There was a table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. It was the home of a man who lived by himself and did not need much. Kate put the jar on Webb's workbench and unwrapped it. The glass flickered in the candlelight. What am I looking at? Webb asked. Kate told him the whole story. Thomas's journal, the water samples, the proof of the mercury poisoning, the hearing on Monday, and Judge Wade's plan to take Emma. Webb picked up the jar and held it up to the candle. His hands were shaking, but it was not from his age. It was from something else, something that looked an awful lot like guilt. Thomas, he whispered, you clever son of a gun, will you keep it safe for us? Kate asked. Webb set the jar down and sank into his chair. He rubbed his face with his calloused hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet with tears. I have to tell you something, he said. Something I should have told you 2 years ago. Kate stood perfectly still. What is it? Webb took a long, shaky breath. After Thomas. He died, I rode up to that mine. It was the dead of night, just like it is right now. I had to go see it with my own eyes. I needed to know if Thomas was telling the truth. He took a breath, his voice getting low. I saw that runoff pipe plain as day, saw exactly where it was dumping into our creek. And the water spilling out of it was gray, Kate. It was a sickening gray, and it stunk of metal and death. The color drained from Kate's face. You saw it. You saw them poisoning the water, and you didn't say a word to me. Webb's voice broke. Wade came to see me the very next day. He said he knew I'd been up there. He told me if I ever opened my mouth, he'd call the note on my shop. He'd run me right out of the territory. I'm 70 years old. This little shop is everything I have left. He buried his face in his hands. I was a coward, Webb whispered. Thomas was gone. I kept telling myself that nothing could bring him back, but that's not why I stayed quiet. The real reason I kept my mouth shut was because I was scared. Kate was silent. A storm of feelings crossed her face. Anger, a sense of betrayal, but also a glimmer of understanding. She was a woman who had been fighting this battle all by herself, only to learn her husband's dearest friend had known the truth all along and did nothing. Eli stepped in. But you're telling us now. Webb looked up, pointing a shaky finger at Eli. It's because this man right here showed up. A complete stranger with nothing to gain and no cause to tell a lie. That's what it finally took, Kate. That's what it took to pry the truth out of a scared old man. You aren't a coward, Eli told him. You're just scared. There's a big difference. But Monday is coming fast. Kate is going to need folks who are willing to say out loud what everyone else has only been whispering. Webb sat up a little straighter in his chair. What is it you need me to do? On Monday at the hearing, Kate said, her voice holding steady even with tears on her cheeks. Stand up. Just tell them what you saw at the mine. Tell them everything you know about Thomas. Wade will ruin me. Wade Mining Company is already ruining you, Eli leaned in to say. He's ruining this whole town. He's just doing it slow enough that most folks don't even see it happening. But if you find the courage to stand, others just might stand right there with you. Webb just stared at the jar of water. The liquid inside looked perfectly clear, almost harmless. But all three of them knew what it was carrying, what it did to Thomas Brennan, and what it was now doing to little Emma. I will be there on Monday, Webb said at last. May God forgive me for taking this long. Kate reached over and took the old man's hand, giving it a squeeze. Thomas always told me you were the best man he ever knew. Thomas was mistaken about that. Webb looked over at Eli. But I don't think he was wrong about the water. And I reckon it's about time this whole town found out the truth. They rode back to the ranch without a word. The moon had crept clear across the sky. It was well past midnight. The world always felt different in these quiet hours, more still, more truthful. It was like the truth had more space to breathe when most of the world was fast asleep. About halfway home, Kate finally spoke. You mentioned you lost someone, your brother. Eli kept riding alongside her. He didn't answer for a good long while. The moonlight stretched their shadows out long and thin on the trail ahead. Yeah, he said at last. Can you tell me what happened? Eli rode on for a long time in silence. The sound of their horses' hooves fell into a steady rhythm. The night air was cool on their faces, carrying the smell of sagebrush and dried Texas grass. Tommy was just 22, Eli finally said. I was 30. I'd been a deputy marshal down in Silver Creek, Colorado for about 6 years. Tommy, he followed me out there. He wanted to be a lawman, just like me. He really looked up to his big brother. He stopped for a moment. It was a bank robbery. 4 men. I was clear on the other side of town when it all started. Somebody ran to come get me. I rode as hard as I could. I got there just 30 seconds after they had shot him. Eli's voice never wavered. It was flat and hard, the sound of a man who had replayed this story in his own head 1,000 times. He was lying there on the floor, his badge still pinned to his chest. Blood was everywhere. He looked right up at me and said, Eli, I'm sorry. As if he had somehow let me down. Like he had failed me. He apologized to me while he was dying. Kate didn't try to offer him any empty comfort. She didn't say she was sorry for his loss. She just kept riding right there beside him, close enough for him to feel that she was there, steady and certain. I turned in my badge that very night, Eli went on. I told myself I was through with protecting people, done with being responsible for lives I couldn't manage to save. I spent the next 8 years just drifting, never putting down roots, never making a promise I might not be able to keep. And then Emma just grabbed your horse right out of a creek. Yeah. A faint smile almost touched Eli's lips. I reckon God must have a strange sense of humor. They finally made it back to the ranch. Emma was still sound asleep. Dusty the dog lifted his head as they came in, gave his tail a single thump, and then settled right back down. Kate went to check on her daughter. She pulled the blanket up higher, kissed her on the forehead, and then just stood there in the doorway, watching Emma breathe. Eli waited out on the porch, giving them their space. He looked up at the endless stars. They were so bright out here, far away from everything. There was nothing but the stars and the silence and the heavy weight of what was coming. Kate came out onto the porch, pulling the door gently closed behind her. 2 days until Monday, she said. Just 2 days. Wade is going to throw everything he has at me. The law, the town, my good name, every single weapon he can think of. And you'll have proof that he poisoned your husband. a witness who saw the mine's runoff with his own eyes, and a former deputy marshal standing right there with you. Kate looked at him in the pale moonlight. That's a whole lot more than I had yesterday. Yesterday you didn't have anything. Today you have a chance. She's held his eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. It wasn't trust, not quite, but it was the start of it. The beginning of something that could grow into trust, if they could just make it through Monday. Don't you make promises you can't keep, Kate said in a low voice. I'm not promising that we'll win. I'm just promising that I'll be there. That's all I can offer you. Kate nodded, turning to head back inside. She stopped at the door. Eli. Yeah, thank you. For finding the journal, for helping me get the samples, for not just riding away when you had every good reason to. I'm still here, ain't I? You are. She paused for a moment. But there's a difference between staying and fighting. On Monday, when Wade shows up with his fancy lawyers and his threats and all his power, will you still be here then? Eli unconsciously touched the old scar on his wrist. I was 30 seconds too late to save my brother. I'm not going to be too late to save your daughter. Kate's eyes welled up with tears. She blinked them back quickly. Good night, Eli. And she disappeared inside. Eli stood alone on that porch. The night was at its deepest now, that hour right before the dawn, when the darkness feels thickest, when all your doubts shout the loudest. He thought about Tommy, about getting there too late, about the cold floor of that bank, about being just 30 seconds too late to change a single thing. He thought about Emma, about the tremble in her small hands, about the poison working its way through her blood, about Monday coming down on them, whether they were ready for it or not. He thought about Kate, about a woman who had been fighting this fight all alone for 2 long years, who'd been called crazy just for telling the truth, who was about to walk into a courtroom and face the man who killed her husband and was now trying to take her daughter away. Eli finally went out to the barn, laid down on a pile of hay, and stared up at the wooden rafters. His mind just would not be quiet. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, he gave up on the idea of sleep, sat up and decided he'd better check on the horses, just to make sure everything was secure. The barn was quiet and peaceful. His horse and Kate's mare stood calmly in their stalls, perfectly content and safe. Eli walked the length of the barn, checking all the doors, the windows, and the roof. Everything was as locked down as he could make it. He was just about to head back to his bed of hay when he heard it. Hoofbeats. More than one horse, and they were coming fast. Eli moved silently to the barn door and peered out into the darkness. The moon was starting to set. The very first hint of dawn was touching the eastern sky, but it was not morning yet. It was still dark enough for things to hide. 6 riders came barreling up the road toward the ranch. A cold feeling washed over Eli. He recognized Deputy Carter's horse right away. He recognized Carter himself, leading the group. The other 5 men Eli didn't know, but they all had that same hard look about them. Hired guns, the kind of men who did Wade's dirty work for a paycheck. They pulled up about 50 yards from the cabin. Carter swung down from his horse, walked forward, and stopped at the fence line. Mrs. Brennan? Carter's voice sliced through the quiet of the pre-dawn air. I know you're in there. You need to come on out. A lamp flickered to life in the cabin window. He could see Kate's silhouette. Eli moved like lightning, cutting across the yard and slipping in through the back door. He found Kate standing at the front window, a rifle now in her hands, her face pale in the dim light. 6 men, she whispered. It's Carter and 5 others. I saw. Just then, Emma appeared, her hair a mess from sleeping, her eyes wide with fear. Mama, what's going on? Kate handed the rifle to Eli and knelt down beside Emma. Baby, I need you to go down to the root cellar under the kitchen floor. Take Dusty with you. And don't you come out until you hear me say so. Mama, no. Emma, you do it now. Emma's little chin quivered, but she did as she was told. She lifted the trap door in the kitchen floor and climbed down the small ladder. Dusty followed right behind her. Kate shut the door, slid a rug over it, and then took the rifle back from Eli. Her hands were perfectly steady now. The fear had turned into something else, something harder and much more dangerous. "Mrs. Brennan," Carter yelled out again, "this is your last chance. Come out of there peacefully." Kate walked right to the front door, threw it open, and stood on her porch with the rifle held tight across her chest. "What do you want, Carter? Judge Wade sent us," he said. "Collect 'em just for safekeeping." A chill collect 'em just for safekeeping. A chill settled over Kate's face. "I don't have a clue what you're talking about." "Now, Mrs. Brennan, let's not play silly games." Carter's lips curled into a smile. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. It's your call." Just then, Eli stepped onto the porch right beside Kate. Carter's smile vanished. "Well, look at you, Drifter. I didn't figure on seeing you up and about this early. I didn't figure you'd be threatening women and children before sunup, but here we are." Carter's hand drifted down to his pistol. He didn't draw, just let it rest there. A clear threat. "This ain't your fight, stranger. Best you walk away. Live to see another day. I can't rightly do that." "And why is that?" Eli's voice was low and calm. "Because I made a promise, and I'm getting mighty tired of breaking 'em." The 5 fellas behind Carter began to spread out, each one resting a hand on his gun. The message couldn't be clearer. 6 men against 2. And Kate was no gunslinger, not by a long shot. She was just a woman who'd learned to shoot to protect her ranch. The odds were long. The situation was a whole lot worse, and Monday was still 2 full days away. But Eli had been in tight spots before, and he'd faced down longer odds. The only difference this time was he wasn't by himself. This time he had something worth fighting for. He had failed Tommy. He was not going to fail Emma and Kate. Not this time. Never again. The air before dawn had a real bite to it. Eli could see the mist from his own breath. He could see Kate's breath right beside him. And he could see the breath of 6 men on horseback 50 yards off, with their hands on their guns, just waiting for the word to do what they came to do. Carter urged his horse a step forward. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Nice and civil-like. Hand over whatever Thomas Brennan left you, whether it's papers, samples, or anything that might cause Judge Wade any undue bother. And if I refuse?" Kate's voice was steady as a rock. "Then we'll search this place and we'll tear it apart board by board if we have to. Judge Wade himself gave us the authority. Legal authority? You call this legal authority, breaking into a woman's home before the sun is even up? Threatening a widow and her little girl?" Kate's grip on her rifle grew tighter. "That's not the law. That's just plain thuggery." Carter gave a cold, empty smile. "Call it whatever you please, ma'am. The end result is going to be the same. You've got something Wade wants, and we're fixin' to take it." Eli took a step forward, placing himself square between Kate and the riders. His hand rested near his gun belt. "Not drawing, just getting ready. You'll have to get through me first." Carter let out a laugh. "You're just one man, Drifter. There are 6 of us. Do you really want to die for some folks you just met 3 days ago? I've died for a whole lot less." The words hung heavy in the air, filled with a hard truth. Wait a minute. Carter's smile began to fade. He was accustomed to people cowering, used to fear doing his work for him. But Eli's face showed not a lick of fear, only cold calculation. It was the look of a man who had made his peace with dying a long, long time ago. "Who in the world are you?" Carter asked. "For real?" "The name is Elijah Cross. I used to be a deputy marshal out of Silver Creek, Colorado. I know the law, Carter, and I know the difference between legal authority and armed robbery. What you're doing right now, this here is the second one." Carter's jaw clenched up tight. "That marshal's badge of yours doesn't mean a thing out here. Maybe not, but it does mean I know how to shoot. It means I know how to make every single bullet count. It means if you ride up onto this porch, at least 3 of you are not going to ride back." One of the men behind Carter shifted in his saddle, a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Eli saw it. He could tell which ones were hired guns and which were just taking orders. The nervous ones, they would be the first to break. "Mrs. Brennan," Carter's voice turned to stone. "This is your last chance. Give us what Wade is after, or we're coming to get it." Kate raised her rifle, aiming it right at Carter's chest. Her hands were perfectly steady now. All the fear had burned away, and in its place was something much hotter, something that had been simmering for 2 long years. "You want to search my house?" Kate's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "You want to put the fear of God into my daughter? You want to finish the job your boss started when he poisoned my husband?" She worked the action, chambering around. "Come on and try it." Carter's face turned a deep shade of red. "You're pointing a firearm at a deputy. You're threatening a mother. I'd say that makes us about even." Eli's hand moved toward his Colt, slow and deliberate. He drew it. He held it down by his side. 6 bullets, 6 men. The arithmetic was brutal, but it was not impossible. "Here is how this is going to go," Eli said in a quiet voice. "You're going to turn those horses around. You're going to ride back to Wade. You'll tell him Monday is coming, and we'll settle this matter in a courtroom like civilized people. Or you can try your luck coming through me and Mrs. Brennan. But I will promise you this, some of you are going to die. Maybe all of you. Maybe me as well. But you'll be dead, and we'll still be standing right here." A heavy, thick silence fell over them, the kind of quiet that comes right before violence erupts. Then one of the hired guns finally spoke up. He was a young fella, maybe 25, and scared. "Carter, this is not what we signed on for. We were supposed to scare him, not start a full-blown shooting war." "You shut your mouth," Carter snapped. "No." The young man began to back his horse away. "I am not dying for Wade's land grab. I have a wife. I've got a baby on the way. This is just plain crazy. You ride away right now, and you don't get your pay. I would rather be alive and broke than dead and rich." The young man turned his horse completely around and rode off, vanishing into the gray light of the early dawn. 5 of them left. Carter's hand moved back to his gun. "Does anyone else want to play the coward?" Another man cleared his throat. He was older, maybe 50 or so. "The kid has a point, Carter. This here marshal looks like he knows exactly what he's doing. And that woman, she is not backing down one bit. This whole thing could get ugly in a hurry." "It is already ugly," Carter shot back. "The only question now is whether you're with me or against me." The older man considered it for a moment, looked at Eli, then at Kate, and made up his mind. "I'm out." He turned his horse. "You can tell Wade I am finished. If he wants a war, he can fight it all by himself." 4 men were left. Carter was starting to sweat now, even with the chill in the air. His whole plan was falling to pieces. Wade had sent him out here with 6 men just to put a scare into a widow. Instead, he was facing down a former marshal and watching his own crew abandon him. "Fine," Carter snarled. 4 is more than enough. But his voice had a slight tremble, just enough for Eli to catch it. "Stand down, Carter," Eli said. "This is not going to end well for you. I have my orders. Your orders are about to get you killed." Carter drew his pistol fast, a whole lot faster than Eli had expected. But Eli was already in motion. Years of training took over, pure muscle memory. He raised his Colt and fired. The shot roared across the valley. Birds burst out from the trees. The horses shied and spooked. Carter's gun went flying out of his hand. Blood dripped from his fingers. Eli had shot the pistol clean from his grasp without even touching his flesh. It was a warning shot, a demonstration of pure skill. Carter stared at his bleeding hand, then looked at Eli, and then at his own gun lying a good 10 feet away in the dirt. "The next one goes into your chest," Eli said, his voice as calm as death. "Your move." The 3 men who were still there looked at each other, then at Carter, then back at Eli, who held a smoking pistol like it was a part of his own arm. "We are leaving," one of them declared. He did not wait for any permission. He just turned and rode. The other 2 were right behind him. Carter now stood all alone, on foot, his gun gone, his hand bleeding. His pride was shattered. "You tell Wade," Kate said from the porch. "You tell him we are not afraid of him anymore. Tell him Monday is coming and we are ready. Tell him Thomas left us everything we need to bury him for good." Carter's face contorted with pure rage. "You have no idea what you are getting into. No idea who you are truly fighting. Wade owns this whole territory. He owns the law. He owns everything. He does not own us, Kate said. Not any longer. Carter walked over to his horse, climbed on with his good hand, and looked back at them one last time. Monday, he said, Wade will crush you in that court, and after that there will not be a single place in this territory where you can hide. Then he rode off. The sun finally broke over the tops of the mountains. The first light, golden and clean, washed over the land, and the violence of the moment began to fade into the stillness of the morning. Eli lowered his gun. He noticed his hand was shaking now, the adrenaline starting to wear off. He had been in shootouts before. He had faced down criminals, outlaws, and men who wanted him dead. But this felt different. This felt personal. Kate lowered her rifle. Her hands were shaking too. She slowly sank down onto the porch step. The strength that had held her up for the last 10 minutes was suddenly all gone. I almost shot him, she whispered. My finger was right there on the trigger. I almost killed a man. Eli sat down beside her. But you did not. That is what counts. I wanted to. That is what frightens me. For just a second, I really wanted to pull that trigger and just watch him fall. That is just called being human. It is called being scared and angry and fighting for your child. Eli holstered his pistol. You did good, Kate. You stood your ground. You did not back down. Kate looked over at him, her eyes glistening. This is all just insane. We're about to go to war with the most powerful man in this entire territory over some water samples and a dead man's journal. We are going to lose everything. Maybe, Eli's voice was gentle, or maybe we win. Either way, you are not in this alone anymore. The trap door in the kitchen floor lifted up. Emma's face appeared, pale and dusty, right beside her mother. Mama, is it over? Kate quickly wiped her eyes, got to her feet, and went to her daughter. She pulled her up out of the cellar and held her as tight as she could. It is over, sweetheart, for now. I heard a gunshot. Mr. Eli made them go away. They're all gone. Emma looked at Eli. Her brown eyes seemed far too old for a 9-year-old, far too knowing. Are they going to come back? Eli thought about telling a lie. He thought about offering some simple comfort. But Emma, she deserved the truth. It is possible, he said. But if they do, we will be ready for them. Emma just nodded, as if she had been expecting that very answer. As if she had already learned at 9 years old that the world does not give out easy answers or safe promises. Kate started to make some coffee. No one talked about what had just happened. They all moved through their morning chores like the standoff had never even occurred. Like 6 men had not just tried to terrorize them into giving up. But the rifle stayed loaded and ready on the kitchen table, and Eli kept his gun belt on, and Kate kept stealing glances out the window, as if she expected Carter to come riding back over the hill. After they ate breakfast, Emma went outside with Dusty. She needed some fresh air. She needed to feel normal, even when nothing at all was normal. Kate and Eli sat at the table. Today is Sunday, Kate said. Monday is tomorrow. Just one more day until Wade comes for Emma. We have the samples. We have the book. Ready to stand trial. We have Thomas's journal. That is not nearly enough. Kate's voice sounded as empty as a dry well. You saw the look on Carter's face. Wade knows we are holding something. He is going to come at us even harder now. He will bring in his lawyers, apply pressure, and use all the power he has. Then we will use ours. Kate let out a bitter laugh. What power is that? I am a widow with a ranch that is about to go under. You are a drifter. Webb is a blacksmith who is 70 years old. What kind of power do we really have? The truth. The truth did not do Thomas any good, no. But Thomas made sure that the truth would save Emma. That is what those samples are for. That is what his journal is for. He died making certain he would leave behind weapons for this fight. Kate's eyes began to water again. She was crying more in that moment than she had in 2 years. It was like something deep inside her had finally shattered. As if the wall she had built around herself just to get by was finally tumbling down. I am so very tired, she whispered. 2 years of fighting this all by myself. 2 years of folks calling me crazy. 2 years of watching my little girl get sicker and sicker and feeling helpless to stop it. I am just so tired. Eli. Eli reached his hand across the table and took hers. Her fingers were cold and shaking. Then let me carry some of that weight for you, he said. Just for a little while, at least until Monday. You do not have to be strong all on your own anymore. Kate looked down at their joined hands, hers small and covered in scars. His was bigger, and the scar on his wrist stood out. Just two broken people trying to hold on to one another. What is the real reason you're doing this? She asked. The whole truth, not the story about your brother. Why are you putting your life on the line for us? Eli was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Emma was playing with Dusty, tossing a stick that the dog kept bringing back. It was the simple happiness of a child who had no idea her whole world was about to break apart. Because 3 days ago, I was nothing but a ghost, Eli said at last. I was empty inside, just going through the motions. And I had been that way for 8 years. Then your daughter stood in that creek and said, please. And something inside me woke up, something I was sure had died right along with Tommy. He took a breath, a purpose. That is what woke up. For 8 long years, I did not have a purpose other than running away. I had no reason to give a damn about anything. But Emma, she gave me a reason. You gave me a reason. And just maybe, if I can help save you both, it will help make up for the fact that I could not save Tommy. That is not how any of this works, Kate said gently. Saving us will not bring your brother back to life. I know that. But it might help me learn to live with myself again. It might let me get some sleep without seeing his face every single time I close my eyes. Kate gave his hand a squeeze. You are a good man, Elijah Cross. I am just a broken man trying to fix something before it is gone forever. Then we are both broken. And maybe that is all we need. They sat there like that for a spell, holding hands across the old wooden table. Two people who had lost far too much, who had been fighting all alone for too long, and who had finally found someone willing to stand right there with them. Then Kate gently pulled her hand away, stood up, and wiped the tears from her eyes. We are going to need more help, she said. Webb is a good man, but he is not enough. We need other people to testify, other families who have been harmed by Wade's mine. Who else lives downstream? Kate took a moment to think. There is the Henderson family. Their son has had the shakes for more than a year. Martha Webb, who is Henry's daughter. Her own little girl has been sickly. Old man Patterson lost a few head of cattle. The Fletcher family's well went foul last spring. Do you think any of them will testify? I do not know. They are just as scared as everyone else. Then our job is to make them a little less scared. We need to show them they are not alone in this, that other people are willing to stand up and fight. Kate nodded her head. We will go talk to them today, before Monday gets here, before Wade has a chance to scare them into staying quiet. I will go, Eli said. You should stay here with Emma. Keep her safe. No. Kate's voice was unyielding. We will go together. Emma is coming with us. I am not about to leave her by herself. Not after what happened this morning. Eli knew she was right. After Carter's visit, Kate was never going to let Emma out of her sight. She could not take that chance. Then we will all go, he said. We will face this thing as a family. They made it to town around mid-morning. Little Emma sat right in front of Kate on the horse, with Eli riding alongside. Their dog, Dusty, trotted along happily, his tongue hanging out, clueless to all the trouble. The town was still, with that special quiet that only comes on a Sunday. The church bells had already rung about an hour before. Most everyone was inside having their Sunday dinner and taking a rest. Kate guided them to a little house on the east end of town. The white paint was peeling off the walls and the garden was all overgrown. An old toy wagon was just left in the yard. This is the Hendersons' place, Kate said quietly. Their boy, Tommy, is 10 now. Last year his hands started shaking so bad he could not even go to school. They got off their horses. Kate went up and knocked. A woman who looked to be about 40, worn down and thin from worry, opened the door. Her eyes got wide when she saw who it was. "Mrs. Brennan, I was not expecting you." She looked up and down the street, nervous as a cat. "You really should not be here. Mrs. Henderson, I have to talk with you. It is about Tommy, and it is about the water." The woman's face just shut down. "I cannot. My husband said not to get mixed up in it. You need to leave. Your boy is sick on account of Wade's mine. You know that is the truth. Knowing something and proving it are two mighty different things." Kate took out Thomas's journal and showed the pages to Mrs. Henderson. It had all the notes, the careful records of how the sickness was moving right down the creek. "Thomas proved it," Kate said. "Right before he died, he gathered samples of the water. We have them right now. We can get them tested. We can show everybody what Wade has been doing." Mrs. Henderson's hands were shaking as she read through the journal. "Thomas was always so careful about things. Will you help us? We need you on Monday at the courthouse. Will you get up there and tell them what happened to your Tommy?" Mrs. Henderson glanced back inside her home. A little boy was at the table, his hands trembling as he tried to hold his fork. It was her son, and it was her job to protect him. "If I speak out, Wade will destroy us. My husband has a job at that mine. We would lose it all. But if you stay quiet, Tommy just gets worse. That water does not stop running. More children are going to get sick." Kate's voice was soft, but it was also steady as a rock. "I am not asking you to give up your family. I am asking you to save them." Mrs. Henderson squeezed her eyes shut. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I will talk to my husband," she whispered. "I cannot give you my word, but I will try." They went to 3 other houses that afternoon. It was the same sad story every place they went. People were scared and worried, caught between doing what was right and just trying to survive. By the time evening came, they had gotten promises from 2 of the families. But they were fragile promises, the kind that might just disappear come Monday morning, once Wade started throwing his weight around. They were on their way back to the ranch when they saw it. A column of black smoke rising up from where the Brennan place should be. The color drained right out of Kate's face. No, 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 no. They dug their heels in and rode as hard as they could. Emma clung to her mother while Dusty ran full out to keep up. When they came over the top of the hill, they saw it plain as day. The barn was on fire. Not the house, thank God, just the barn. Big orange flames were licking up at the evening sky. The smoke was thick and black. Kate let out a scream and charged right for it. Eli reached out and grabbed her reins, pulling her to a stop. "Kate, hold on, the horses are out, see?" Their 2 horses were safe over in the pasture. Somebody had let them out before they set the fire. This was not about hurting animals. This was meant to send a message. Kate slid down from her horse and just stood there in the yard, staring. 2 whole days of Eli's hard work was going up in smoke. All of Thomas's tools were inside, all of Emma's papa's things. "They did this," she said, her voice completely empty. "Wade's men came back and did this." Emma started to cry. "Papa's workshop is in there. Everything he owned." Eli got off his horse and studied how the fire was burning. It was kerosene, lit in a few different spots all at once. This was set by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing. The barn was a total loss. There was no saving it. All they could do was stand there and watch it burn. Kate fell to her knees in the dust, and Emma dropped down beside her. A mother and daughter watching the fire eat away what was left of Thomas Brennan's memory. Eli came up behind them and put a hand on Kate's shoulder. He did not say a word because there were no words to say. This was Wade's answer. This is what you get when you stand up to him. When you refuse to be scared quiet, he burns your barn, he destroys how you make a living, and he turns your husband's memory to ashes. That fire blazed for a good 2 hours. By the time it was nothing but glowing embers, the barn was just a skeleton of black boards and bent metal. The roof was gone and the walls had fallen in. Everything that was inside was gone forever. Kate still had not moved. She just knelt there in the dirt and watched. Emma had cried until she had no more tears, and now she just sat there quiet, leaning on her mother. "The samples," Kate said out of nowhere. "Were they in the barn?" "No," Eli answered. "One is buried out at Willow Creek, one is with Webb, and the last one—" He trailed off. He had hidden Kate's sample in the barn. It was in the back stall, buried under a pile of hay. Something in his face must have given it away because Kate grabbed his arm. It was in there, was it not? The sample was in the barn. Eli did not say anything. He did not have to. Kate let out a noise that was not a scream and was not a laugh. It was something caught right between heartbreak and pure rage. "They burned it. Wade burned our proof." "We still have two more," Eli said quickly. "The one at the creek and the one Webb has. Unless Wade knows about them too, unless this is only the beginning." Emma looked up, her face smudged with soot and tears. "We need to go to Willow Creek. We have to make sure Papa's sample is still safe." Kate nodded, then got to her feet and helped Emma up. They were both covered in filth, but their eyes were hard as flint. The tears were gone now. Something else was there instead. Pure anger. They rode to Willow Creek under the cover of darkness, with only the moon to light their way. The path was second nature to them by now. They had been down it enough in the last 3 days to know every twist and turn. The old fishing spot looked quiet and undisturbed. The big rock was there, and the willow tree, the same place where Thomas and Emma used to spend their Saturday mornings. Eli started digging where they had hidden the third sample. His hands hit something hard. It was the wooden box, still there, still wrapped up tight in oilcloth. He lifted it out and unwrapped it. The glass jar was perfect, the water inside was clear, and you could read the label just fine. It was Thomas's handwriting, no doubt about it. Kate took the jar from him and held it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "One left. We have one sample left." "Two," Eli corrected her. "Do not forget, Webb has one. That is, if Wade has not paid him a visit yet." They rode straight back to town, right to Webb's blacksmith shop, and started banging on the door. Webb opened it holding a shotgun, but he lowered it when he saw them. "Good Lord, what in the world happened to you all?" "Wade burned my barn," Kate said flatly. "Is your sample safe?" Webb's expression turned grim. He disappeared back inside and came out a moment later holding the jar. It was safe and sound. "It is hidden," Webb told them. "Tucked behind a secret panel in my shop. Wade's boys could tear the whole place down, and they would never find it." Kate almost collapsed with relief. "Two samples, we still have two." Webb took a long look at the ash on their clothes, at Emma's tear-streaked face, and the bone-deep tiredness in Kate's eyes. "This is a war now," Webb said in a low voice. "You know that, do you not? Wade has declared war. He is done playing by any rules." "Then so are we," Kate said, her voice hard as steel. "Monday morning at the courthouse. We bring it all. The journal, the samples, anyone who will stand with us. And we are going to make Wade answer for what he did." Webb nodded his head. "I will be there, and I know some other folks who will be too." "Who?" "Doc Pierce stopped by to see me this afternoon. He said he is done being quiet. He is ready to testify about what really killed Thomas." Webb paused for a second. "And there is something else. The doc told me he did something 3 days ago, right after you came to see me that first night." Kate leaned in closer. "What did he do?" "He wrote a letter to the United States Marshal's office up in Cheyenne. He sent them copies of Thomas's real medical files, his blood reports, all of it. He said the guilt was eating him alive. He figured that even if he got scared and backed out of testifying, at least the truth would get to someone with the power to do something." Eli felt his chest get tight. "Did he hear anything back from the marshal?" "He does not know. He put it in the mail 3 days ago. You know how slow the federal mail can be." Webb looked them square in the eye. "But if that letter got to the right man, and if a United States Marshal decides to show up on Monday, then Wade is trapped," Kate finished for him. Webb gave a slow nod. "Then Wade is trapped." Webb went on to explain everything. He sent copies of it all. Thomas's real records, the proof of mercury poisoning, a list of the other families who have gotten sick. He asked for a full federal investigation. Eli felt a change deep inside him. If a federal lawman came to town, Wade could not just brush this aside. He could not make it all disappear with threats and payoffs. Kate covered her mouth with her hand, stunned. "Doc Pierce did all that? After 2 whole years of staying silent, he sent proof to the government." Webb said the doctor told him he just could not live with himself any longer. "We're not from sadness. It was relief. We're not from sadness. It was relief mixed with a little bit of shock. We might actually have a real chance," she whispered. "We might just win this thing." "Now, let us not get ahead of ourselves," Webb cautioned. "Wade has money and connections we can only dream of. He has got lawyers and judges in his pocket. But yes, ma'am, we have got a chance." They rode back home underneath a sky full of stars. The burnt-out barn stood like a dark shadow against the night, a harsh reminder of everything they had lost and everything they were putting on the line. But they also had 2 water samples. They had Webb on their side. They had Doc Pierce's newfound courage, the hope of a federal marshal, and most important, they had each other. Kate tucked Emma into bed back at the cabin. The little girl was worn out and fell asleep in a heartbeat with Dusty curled up at her feet. Kate stepped back outside and saw Eli sitting on the porch steps, just staring at the ruins of the barn. "I am so sorry," Eli said quietly. "That sample was my job to protect. I should have found a better place for it. You had no way of knowing they would burn the whole barn down. I am the one who should have seen it coming." Kate sat down right next to him, so close their shoulders were touching. "Stop it," she said gently. "Stop trying to carry the weight of every bad thing that happens. Stop blaming yourself for what you could not have known. Had any control over this? No, you could not have." Kate's voice was firm. "Wade is the one who did this, not you. Wade is the one who burned down my barn. Wade is the one who poisoned my husband. And Wade is trying to take my daughter from me. This is all on his shoulders." Eli looked at her, at this woman who had lost so much, who had been fighting on her own for 2 years, who by all rights should be broken, but somehow was not. "You are a stronger person than I am," he said. "No, I am just more desperate. Desperation starts to look a lot like strength when you are fighting for your child." They sat there in the quiet. The night air was cold, and the stars were shining bright. Off in the distance somewhere, a coyote let out a howl. "Tomorrow is Sunday," Kate said. "On Monday, we go to court. This whole thing ends one way or another." "Yeah." "Are you scared?" "I am terrified." Kate managed a very small smile. "Good, me too." She rested her head on his shoulder. Eli froze. He did not move a muscle. He did not want to break whatever was happening in that moment. "Thank you," Kate whispered, "for staying, for fighting with me, for being here when I did not have anyone else. I am here because this is where I want to be." "Why?" Eli thought about all the things he could say, about Tommy, about finding some kind of redemption, about the 8 years he spent running. But when it came right down to it, the truth was much simpler than all that. "Because when I am here, I do not feel like a ghost anymore." He said, "I feel alive. For the first time in 8 years, I am actually alive." Kate lifted her head and looked right at him. In the moonlight, her eyes looked soft and unguarded. The walls she had built around her heart were gone, just for that moment. Just for him. "Eli." "Yeah. If we get through Monday, if we somehow manage to win, what happens after that? What do you want to happen?" Kate was quiet for a moment. "Then I want you to stay, not just for 3 days, not just until the harvest is in. I want you to stay for good." Eli's heart started pounding in his chest. "Kate, I know it sounds crazy. I know we have barely known each other, but somewhere in these last 3 days, you have become a part of this, a part of us. And the thought of you leaving after Monday, the thought of having to fight all by myself again," her voice cracked. "I cannot do it, Eli. I cannot go back to being all alone." Eli took her hand and held it tight. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "On Monday we are going to fight Wade. We will win or we will lose, but we will do it together. And after that, when all the dust has settled, I will still be right here. I am staying." Kate's eyes filled with tears. "You promise?" "I promise." She kissed him, a quick, soft kiss, and then pulled back, looking both scared and brave at the same time. Eli reached up and touched her face, then kissed her back, slower this time. He meant it. When they finally pulled apart, Kate was smiling through her tears. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." They sat there together on the porch until the sun came up, not saying a word. Just being there, two broken people who had found one another in the middle of the wreckage of their lives, who had come to realize that being together was a whole lot better than being alone. Tomorrow was Sunday, the day before the big fight. Monday was going to be Judgment Day. And no matter what happened, they were going to face it together. Monday morning came in clear and cold. There were no clouds in the sky, just a whole lot of blue, the mountains, and the heavy feeling of what was about to happen. Eli was already up and had been for hours. He had cleaned his gun, checked every single bullet, and put on his cleanest shirt. This was not just the law. This was war dressed up in a suit and tie. He needed to look the part. Kate put Emma in her Sunday best, a little white dress, clean shoes, and her hair brushed out and tied back with a ribbon. Emma looked like she was on her way to church, not to a courthouse where a judge was going to decide if she could stay with her own mother. They ate their breakfast without saying a word. Nobody had much of an appetite, but Kate made them eat something anyway. "You need your strength," she said. "Whatever happens today, you are going to need your strength." The ride into town felt a whole lot longer than it actually was. Every minute seemed to stretch on forever. Every clop of the horses' hooves counted. The courthouse stood right in the middle of town. It was a 2-story building made of stone and wood, with a flag hanging limp in the still air. The street was jam-packed with people. It looked like half the town had shown up. Some were there to support Kate, but most of them were there to watch the show to see what would happen when a lone widow decided to challenge the most powerful man in the whole territory. Eli helped Kate get down from the horse, with Emma standing between them. Dusty stayed behind with the horses. The dog let out a whine as they walked away. As they were walking up the courthouse steps, Eli saw Henry Webb standing by the entrance. The old blacksmith was wearing his Sunday coat, holding his hat in his hands. Standing next to him was Doc Pierce, clutching his medical bag to his chest. Both of the men's faces were pale, but they looked determined. Webb gave a single nod to Kate. She nodded right back. They had come. Both of her witnesses were there, ready to take the stand. Inside, the courtroom was hot, even though it was a cold morning. There were too many bodies packed in, too much tension in the air, and every single bench was full. People were standing along the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat and the feeling of what was to come. Judge Cornelius Wade sat high up behind the bench. He was 60 years old, with silver hair and black robes, the very picture of authority and power. But Eli thought he saw something in Wade's eyes, something that looked a little like worry. Good, let him worry. Deputy Carter was standing by the wall, a bandage wrapped around the hand where Eli had shot the gun right out of his grip. The look in Carter's eyes was a clear promise of revenge. Later on, after the law was done with its business, Wade's lawyer stood near the bench, a young man in an expensive suit with a whole stack of papers, all set for a fight. Kate took a seat at the defendant's table. Eli sat right behind her with Emma between them, her small hand clutching her mother's. Wade brought his gavel down with a bang. This hearing is to determine the welfare of the minor child, Emma Brennan. The court has received a petition concerning the fitness of her sole guardian, Mrs. Kate Brennan. Mrs. Brennan, do you have someone to represent you in this legal matter? Kate stood up. I am representing myself, Your Honor. A low murmur went through the crowd in the courtroom. A small smile played on Wade's lawyer's lips. A woman representing herself against him. He thought this would be over in no time. Very well, Wade said. Mr. Harrison, you may go ahead and present your case. The lawyer stood up, cleared his throat, and started to read from his stack of papers. Your Honor, the petitioner would like to present evidence that Mrs. Brennan's homestead has been allowed to fall into a state of severe disrepair. The ranch is failing. The child has been seen running around barefoot without proper clothing and left unsupervised. Furthermore, Mrs. Brennan has been providing shelter to an unknown male transient, which creates a questionable moral environment that is not suitable for a young girl. More murmurs spread through the room. People were turning their heads to get a look at Eli. We request, the lawyer went on, that the court appoint a temporary guardian for the child until a full investigation can be conducted into Mrs. Brennan's concerns about your fitness as a parent. Wade nodded with a grave expression. These are very serious concerns, Mrs. Brennan. How do you respond to them? Kate rose to her feet. Her hands were shaking a little, but her voice was strong and clear. Your Honor, my ranch is not failing. It is being systematically sabotaged. Just 2 nights ago, somebody tried to set my barn on fire. On Saturday morning, 6 men, led by Deputy Carter, showed up at my home before dawn, threatening me and my daughter. The courtroom exploded with murmurs. Wade slammed his gavel down. Mrs. Brennan, those are extremely serious allegations for which you have no evidence. I do have evidence. Kate pulled out Thomas's journal. This is my husband's journal. It contains daily documentation of the water contamination coming from the Wade Mining Company. It is evidence that he was poisoned by mercury in our well water. It is evidence that his death certificate was a lie. She placed the journal squarely on the judge's bench. The color drained from Wade's face. Furthermore, Kate continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, I have water samples that my husband collected before he died. They are sealed, they are labeled, and they are ready for independent testing. Wade leaned forward in his chair. Mrs. Brennan, this hearing is about custody, not about my mining operations. The two are absolutely connected, Your Honor. You filed this petition for custody just 3 days after I refused your latest offer to buy my land. Land that just so happens to sit right over the richest part of Wade Mining's claim. This was never about my daughter's well-being. It is all about clearing a piece of land. A deep hush fell over the courtroom. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, and every single person was looking straight at Judge Wade. The judge's face turned beet red. That is a completely baseless accusation. Eli got to his feet. Then prove she is wrong, Your Honor. Open up your financial books for everyone to see. Show this whole town that you do not have a single dime invested in the Wade Mining Company. Prove that you are a fair judge looking out for a child, not some businessman trying to get rid of a problem. Judge Wade's eyes were fixed on Eli, filled with pure, raw hatred. And just who are you to run your mouth in my courtroom? My name is Elijah Cross. I was a deputy marshal back in Silver Creek, Colorado. I have been watching Mrs. Brennan's place for the last week. The house is clean, the child is well fed, and the mother works 18 hours a day to take care of her little girl, all while this court has been making her life miserable. Eli placed Thomas's journal right on the table in front of Wade. I've also gone through Thomas Brennan's personal papers, where he wrote down every day what he saw with the water contamination, including dates, measurements, and descriptions of sick animals and folks living downstream from Wade Mining. These notes are proof of the environmental poisoning that directly led to Thomas Brennan's death. Judge Wade did not even touch the journal. He just glared at it like it was a coiled rattlesnake. Mr. Cross, you do not have the expertise to judge water quality or figure out why someone died. No, sir, I do not, but a federal assayer sure does, and so does a licensed doctor. a voice called out from the back of the room. "I can shed some light on that, Your Honor." Every head in the place swiveled around. Doc Samuel Pierce was standing right there in the doorway. He was a man of 70 years, wearing his white coat and carrying his medical bag. His hands were shaking a little, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He walked up the aisle with the slow, steady pace of a man who had finally decided he could not live with his secrets anymore. "My name is Dr. Samuel Pierce. I have been the doctor in this town for 42 years. I was the one who signed Thomas Brennan's death certificate 2 years back. Wade tried to shut him down fast. Dr. Pierce, this is not the time for public speeches. Then make it the time." Pierce stared straight at Wade. "Because I lied on that certificate. You told me to write down that he died from a fever of some unknown type, or you would make sure I lost my medical license for good. But Thomas Brennan did not die from any fever. The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Thomas Brennan died from long-term mercury poisoning," Pierce stated. Every word came out slow and sure. "I knew it back then. I have known it for 2 long years, and that guilt has been eating at me every single day since." He reached into his medical bag and took out a thick folder. "These are Thomas's actual medical files with blood work, notes on his symptoms, and everything that proves he was suffering from mercury poisoning consistent with drinking tainted water. I made copies of everything because I had a feeling that one day the truth would need to come out." He placed the folder on the judge's bench, right next to the journal. Wade just stared at the mountain of evidence growing right in front of him, his calm exterior beginning to crumble. "Dr. Pierce, you are obviously not in your right mind, just trying to get attention with this little show. Well then, explain these." Henry Webb, a blacksmith of 70 years with powerful arms and a voice like clanging steel, stood up from his seat. "I saw the drainage pipe coming from Wade Mining with my own 2 eyes, just 2 weeks after Thomas passed. I went up there myself in the middle of the night. The water pouring out of it was gray and smelled like metal. I saw it plain as day." Judge Wade's lawyer shot up from his chair. "Your Honor, this has gone on long enough. This is turning into a circus." But Wade was not paying attention. He was looking at the main door because United States Marshal James Coulter had just walked in. The marshal was a man of 50 years with a federal badge pinned to his dusty coat and eyes that had seen far too much corruption to be fazed by some small-town judge. The marshal strode to the front of the courtroom, each step firm and deliberate. "Judge Wade," Coulter said, "I am United States Marshal Coulter from the Territorial Office. I got a letter 3 days ago about some water contamination and falsified death records happening in your jurisdiction. I have been looking into the Wade Mining Company for the last 72 hours. The color drained from Judge Wade's face, leaving it a sickly gray. "Marshal, this here is a local town matter. It was a local matter. Now it is a federal one. This environmental poisoning is affecting families all across the county line. That puts it squarely in my territory." Coulter turned to look at the people gathered in the courtroom. "I have tested water samples from 3 different places. The well water from the Brennan Ranch shows mercury levels at 400 parts per million. The creek water downstream from Wade Mining has about the same level of contamination. Both of those samples are 40 times higher than what the federal government says is safe." He then turned his gaze back to Wade. "I have also reviewed the medical files for 6 different families that live downstream from that mine. Every single one of them is showing symptoms that point to heavy metal poisoning, and all of them are drinking from wells that get their water from that poisoned creek." The courtroom exploded. People started shouting, some in anger, others in relief. Judge Wade's gavel was completely useless against the wall of sound. Marshal Coulter simply raised his hand. The room went silent. "Judge Wade," Coulter continued, "I am placing the Wade Mining Company under a full federal investigation. All of their operations are to be shut down until a full environmental check is done. I will also be suggesting to the territorial governor that he take a good hard look at your behavior on this bench." Judge Wade stood up, trembling with pure fury. "You do not have the right to shut down my family's business. Your family's business has been poisoning citizens of the United States. That gives me all the right I need." Wade looked out at the faces in the courtroom, faces that had been scared of him just yesterday. He saw the people who had kept their mouths shut because he held their jobs in his hands. He saw a town that was finally seeing the man he truly was. He looked at Kate, this widow he had tried so hard to crush, this woman who had stood up to him all by herself for 2 years, this mother who refused to back down even when he burned her barn and went after her child. Kate stared right back at him, her gaze strong and unbroken. Judge Wade's shoulders slumped. All the fight seemed to just drain right out of him. "The custody petition is dismissed," he said, his voice barely a whisper, without prejudice. Kate's knees gave out from under her. Eli was there to catch her and hold her steady. Emma ran to her mother and wrapped her arms around her waist. "Mama, did we win?" Kate knelt, pulling her daughter into a hug so tight that Emma let out a little squeak. "Yeah, darling," Kate whispered. "We won. We finally won." The courtroom erupted one more time, but this time it was a sound of pure joy. People surged forward, all wanting to shake her hand and pulled her into a hug, saying sorry for 2 long years of quiet. Henry Webb had tears in his eyes. Doc Pierce was crying too. Even Marshal Coulter cracked a smile. Eli just hung back, watching Kate and Emma get flooded with the kind of support they hadn't seen the day before. He saw a town recollecting what it meant to have each other's backs. Wade left through the judge's private door, never once looking up. Deputy Carter trailed right behind him, 2 defeated men. Marshal Coulter made his way over to Eli. That was a mighty risky move going against the former deputy marshal. "Yes, sir, it was. Fine work. But bringing me into it, I have to ask, how did you know about those water samples before Dr. Pierce's letter ever showed up?" Eli took a breath. "I never sent a letter, Marshal. That was a bluff inside the courtroom. I just claimed I'd been in touch with your office. I was hoping it would rattle Wade enough to make him slip up." Coulter let out a laugh. "Well, I'll be. It worked. And Pierce's real letter sealed the deal. I reckon sometimes justice needs a good shove from 2 directions at once." He put out his hand to shake Eli's. "You ever get the itch to pin on a badge again? You come find me. This territory could use a few more men like you. My days of wearing a badge are behind me, but I thank you." Kate spotted him through the crowd, with Emma perched on her hip. Both of them were grinning through their tears. "We did it," Kate breathed out. "We really, truly did it. No, you did it. You kept up the fight for 2 whole years. I only came along at the very end. You showed up when the fight counted the most." Emma reached her little arms out for Eli. He lifted her up. She squeezed her arms tight around his neck. "Thank you for helping my mama," she whispered right into his ear. "Thank you for staying." A lump the size of Texas formed in Eli's throat. He held on to this 9-year-old girl who just 4 days ago had stopped his horse in a creek and turned his whole world upside down. "I'm not going anywhere," he told her. "I gave you my word. Don't you remember?" "I remember." The 3 of them stepped out of that courthouse and into the bright morning light. The whole street was filled with folks celebrating. They were celebrating Kate's win, Wade's downfall, and the simple truth finally beaten out power and money. But all Eli could see were the 2 people who meant anything to him, Kate and Emma. They were his family now. They were the reason he'd stay, the very purpose he'd been searching for over 8 long years. They rode for home together, past the blackened timbers of the barn, past the busted fence line, past every scar Wade had left on their land. But none of that seemed to matter anymore. They had won against impossible odds, against all the influence Wade could buy. They had won because they didn't do it alone. And tomorrow, they would start to rebuild together. By the spring of 1886, the Brennan Ranch was a different place. A new barn stood where the old one had fallen, bigger and better, raised by the hands of townsmen who offered their help for free. The fence was new, running straight and true. The garden was coming in lush and green. 2 healthy horses with shining coats grazed in the pasture. Emma was getting better. Doc Pierce came by to test her blood every single month. The poison levels were dropping, slow but steady. "Another year of clean water and good meals," he had told them just last week. "And she'll be about as right as rain. The shaking in her hands might stick around some, but she'll live a good, long life. Her hands did not tremble nearly as much these days. She could write again, her letters were small and careful, but her own name looked like it should on the page. She could hold her fork without spilling, button up her own dress, and toss a stick for Dusty without her fingers locking up. She was healing a little bit at a time. Right now, she was out in the yard with Dusty trying to teach him tricks. Sit. That's a good boy. Now, roll over. Dusty's tail thumped the ground. He rolled right over. Emma let out a laugh, a sound of pure, simple joy. Kate leaned against the fence, just watching her daughter. Eli was right there beside her, his arms settled around her waist, and her head was resting on his shoulder. "She is getting stronger," Kate said, her voice soft. "A little bit more every day. Just like her mama," Eli said. Kate managed a smile. "We are both stronger because we have you. That strength was in you all along. I just helped you remember it was there." They stood there in a comfortable quiet. 6 months they'd spent building this new life. 6 months of mending. 6 months of figuring out how to be a family. Kate turned her head to look right at him. "Do you ever have second thoughts? About staying here? About giving up that wandering life?" "Only every morning when I wake up," Eli said with a perfectly straight face. Kate swatted his arm. "You're a liar." Eli grinned and pulled her in a little closer. "It was the best decision I ever made. It was the only one that ever really mattered. Even though it means you are stuck with a widow, her sick little girl, and a ranch that was half ruined, especially because of all that." Emma came running up to them. "Mama, Mr. Eli, Dusty learned a whole new trick. Do you want to see? We would love to see it, honey." Emma gave the command. Dusty did his trick perfectly. Emma was beaming with pride. "That is just amazing," Eli told her. "Your papa would be so proud of you." Emma looked up at him, her big brown eyes all serious. "Mr. Eli, can I ask you a question? Anything. Would it be all right if I called you Papa? I know you're not my real Papa. My real Papa is up in heaven, But you are here, and you look after Mama and me, and you teach me things." Her voice trailed off like she was not sure she should have asked. That lump was back in Eli's throat. He looked over at Kate. Her eyes were full of tears, but she was nodding her head yes. He knelt down to be on the same level as Emma. "Emma, nothing in this world would make me prouder." Emma threw her arms around his neck so fast he almost fell back. "Thank you, Papa." Eli hugged her tight. This was the child who had saved him, the little girl who had stood in a creek and asked for his help, giving him a reason to live when he thought he had none left. Kate knelt right down beside them, wrapping her arms around them both. The three of them, a little family circle, with Dusty wagging his tail right alongside. A family that had been shattered into pieces, who found each other and learned that being broken together was a whole lot better than being whole by yourself. That night, long after Emma was tucked in bed, Eli and Kate sat out on the porch. The stars were brilliant in the night sky. The spring air was cool, and you could smell things growing all around them. "I received a letter today," Kate finally said. "It was from the territorial governor. The Wade Mining Company has been shut down for good. Marshal Coulter's investigation uncovered proof of bribery, threats, and forged papers for the court." She took a breath. "Wade and Carter, they took off for California before the federal warrants got here. The governor put out orders for their arrest, but they are out of his reach now. The mines are being sold off. Every cent is going to the families they hurt, for doctor bills and for what they lost." "So they got away clean," Eli said, his voice quiet. "They lost everything they cared about. Their power, their good name, their hold on this town." Kate's voice turned hard as stone. "And they can never set foot back here again. That is all the justice I need. That is good. It is more than good. It is real justice. It is justice for Thomas, for Emma, for every single person Wade hurt." She reached out and took Eli's hand. "None of this would have happened if it were not for you. You have to know that, right? None of this would have happened without Thomas. He was the one who gathered up all the proof, who wrote everything down, who made sure you would have what you needed to fight. Thomas started this fight. You were the one who finished it. Eli looked down at the old scar on his wrist, tracing the line with his thumb. It was just a habit now. The pain was long gone. I spent 8 years running from the fact that I was 30 seconds too late to save my brother, he said, his voice low. Spent 8 long years feeling like I had failed the only person who ever truly mattered to me. He looked straight at Kate. But I was not 30 seconds too late this time. I was right on time. I was here exactly when you and Emma needed me to be. Kate leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of tomorrows. You had perfect timing, she whispered against his lips. You saved us, and we saved you. That is how it is supposed to be, isn't it? They sat there together as the stars wheeled across the sky until the moon dipped below the horizon and the first hint of dawn started to paint the edges of the world. A new day, a new life, a new reason for being. For 8 years, Elijah Cross had been a ghost walking the earth. But now, he was alive. Now, he was home. He was right where he was always meant to be, Adele.